Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Beyond Deadlines podcast, where we tackle challenges that planning and schedule leaders come across on a day-to-day basis. My name is Micah Pipo, and I'm a planning and scheduling manager for Intel.
My name is Greg Lawton. I'm the CEO of an AI schedule management company called Nodes and Links.
Each podcast is designed to give you strategies and tactics that you can implement right away. Today, Greg is on the hot seat, and we're talking about bullying in the workplace. Greg, are you ready?
Not to be bullied, but yes.
Can't promise anything on this show. We're out of the workplace here. There's no rules. All right. So you are a scheduler working on a large construction program. When you first started, you had a very good relationship with the senior project manager. Recently, due to the use of your AI in planning and scheduling, you've caught the eye of many VPs. Since then, your relationship with this senior project manager has deteriorated. They often belittle you in groups and are starting to talk behind your back. How do you handle this situation?
Well, unfortunately, this is probably a situation that a lot of people will find themselves in at some point in their careers. Could you please give me more specifics? Because specifics are going to be very, very important here. Could you give me a sentence that they might have said to belittle me and a sentence that they might have said in talking behind my back?
Yeah. Say in the last team meeting, they made a reference to Greg's silly little side projects. And then behind your back, they said that Greg's just a young gun playing with techie toys and doesn't know how to run projects or know how to build anything.
Got it. And in the meetings when they've said those comments, or the people they've said those comments to, are they members of the senior leadership team?
The team meeting was the site team, so it was a fairly large meeting.
Mm-hmm.
And then behind the back, those were the senior project manager's peers. So I'd say either one level up from you or two levels up from you.
Got it. And how did they react to those comments?
So in the meeting, a lot of awkward laughing, like
Mm-hmm.
a little awkward chuckle. And then in the back comments, you have a person who he doesn't know you're friends with. And so they kind of laughed and chuckled. But the person, didn't stand up for you, but went and told you what the person had said.
Got it. Go on.
I was just going to say, and I said, this is just, one of many, many examples.
So this has happened multiple times.
Yeah, this has happened multiple times, and you have a fear that this is going to hold back your career your career trajectory.
Got it. And we'd have to do a proper analysis of what exactly has been said and in what context, but is it fair to say that, just to keep it simple for the podcast, the senior project manager is either fearful or jealous because someone, in this case, younger or more junior, is outshining them to the people who can determine their promotion paths?
Yep. And we don't want to say a bunch of horrible things on the podcast, but let's just say the things they've said are not great, and they're past the line of work appropriate.
Got it. Okay. Well, before I dive in, we have to be, when you're dealing with HR issues like this, you have to be very, very careful with what you say and to be very precise with your language. And it's also useful to implement some frameworks in order to frame situations and be able to make decisions. So we'll need those to understand the answers I'm going to give. So the first one is really definitions of what bullying and harassment is in my mind. So bullying is the belittling of the efforts of others. Harassment is bullying across time. So if it's a single instance, you have been bullied. If it's multiple instances, I'd look at this as harassment. Now, this is different to discrimination, because discrimination is the belittling or the identification and pulling you out and isolating you because of elements that are not of your choice. So it's identifying you by group and pulling out, for example, of opportunities to do that. So that is about things you can't control. bullying and harassment is about ideas and concepts and things you ultimately can control. So those are the two different things. Now, discrimination is criminal. It's actually against the law. Bullying and harassment is commercial. It's against employment terms and conditions and code and conduct of many different companies. So we have to just be very, very careful there. The second element here is also a framework of management of this situation. So on one axis, you've got formality. So you've got informal to formal. And on the other axes, you've got personal to leadership. So for example, I could have an informal conversation with a senior leader in the business to voice my concerns. I could have an informal conversation with the person themselves. Or I could have a formal conversation with the person themselves, or I could have a formal conversation with senior leadership and make a complaint. So it's the level of severity. Now, obviously, dependent on where we are in the recurrence and impact of bullying, plus the culture of the organization, depends on where we go. The reason I was asking is how did people react to that? Because I wanted to know whether or not there is a systemic leadership problem in managing bullying, or it was an isolated example of managing bullying. If senior leaders hadn't spoken up and said, you can't be saying those things almost immediately, then I'd say there's a systematic problem within that organization, because senior leaders should be held to a higher standard of account. So, for example, a more junior person, it is inappropriate for them to bully. A senior leader, it is inappropriate for them to allow behavior that goes towards the progression of bullying. And bullying and harassment doesn't go from 0 to 100. People start making little jokes and get away with it. And then people start making more pokey comments and get away with it. And it progresses like this. It's the same as in school grounds. People realize, because others haven't told them not to, certain behavior is acceptable or appropriate, and therefore they push the bounds.
Yeah, it's the favorite quote that, culture is the worst behavior that you allow.
Exactly. So
and so
what
let's
I'm
say
hearing here is this is being allowed.
Yeah. Well, let's say let's start zoomed in on the person and the senior manager first, and say that I think it's very hard for people in either junior roles or regular senior roles to then go take on senior leadership is allowing the bullying, and I'm going to go take on the entire org, or however it goes. Let's focus in first on, walk me through the steps of how this scheduler is going to then handle the relationship with the senior project manager at that, coworker face-to-face level.
So this is where, so in that 4-box model, what we're taking is an informal personal conversation. So I'm going to go and have a conversation with the senior project manager. Now that conversation needs to be framed in the following. We need to say what happened, and this needs to be absolutely factual. We need to say how it made us feel, not what other people perceived or whatever. It's how we felt, and then we need to say what actions we'd like to be taken in the future. Now, in that 3-step framework, and that 3-step framework is very, very specific, what I'm not doing is correlating action with individual. So I am not saying you are a bad person. I am saying this action made me feel bad, and I would like to not feel bad. At which point, it's the decision someone made, and I'm just telling them how I felt. It's up to them to then decide whether or not to stop that component. And the second thing is, like you said, I'm not making this a much bigger deal right now because I'm taking that person. So I'd go to them and say, so I've been made aware of a couple of things.
Well, actually, hold on. Let me even take it a step further to really help people out here. Would you set up an off one-on-one Would you use a regular recurring one-on-one space? Like, would you take them out to coffee? Walk me through, because sometimes people even struggle with, how do I set up this meeting, which they're going to have a lot of energy and emotion towards.
Mhm.
I've been in these places where it's, oh my, here comes this big meeting. Is there any sort of thing you'd recommend on just the setup of
It
it?
really depends on the personal nature of this. What I've seen is that for individuals who are more emotionally comfortable with conflict, which means that they have low emotional reactions, so are able to make rational decisions in conflict scenarios. It's more of a kind of just walk over to their desk and say, Micah, something's come up and I really need to have a private word with you. Can I get 5 minutes of your time? And then you step aside and you have the conversation. If you're an individual that is not well, if you're an individual that does suffer from nervousness or worry or gets very emotional in conflict scenarios, which, by the way, research suggests is a genetic thing, not a trained thing. You can train yourself out of it, but it is very much a genetic thing. Then what people do is to take a friend with them who doesn't say anything, just sits there and says, you can say, this is very difficult. I'd still do the same thing. I need to speak to you. And then you say, I'm going to say things that are very difficult for me to say. Micah's here to support me in doing that. Nothing of what I said is going to be mentioned out, but I really need you to take this seriously. And then if there's a moment, obviously, where the emotion's coming over you, your friend can step in and say, it's okay, take a minute, just take a breath. And obviously, aside to that is those kind of situations they need to be prepared for. So you need to basically have written out the examples of what you're going to say.
Yeah, that's beautiful. That'd be super helpful for people out there for dealing with these sorts of situations. All right, let's carry on. Walk me through the actual, you're working on the access and you've gone and spoke to the person. I don't think we dove enough into the finer points, the nuanced points of how you would say things to this person to get them to understand
I'll give you an
words
exact
and
example
actions
now.
and how they impact you. Yeah, perfect.
So if you're the individual, you're the senior project manager that's been saying these things, I'll say, Micah, I've heard some worrying things that have made me feel quite insecure and like I'm not appreciated at work, and I just wanted to voice them. There's going to be no accusing, and I'd just like it to end with this conversation. I need your help to understand the situation, if that's okay. Yes, I'm blind. So I've heard of 3 events. The first event is in this team meeting where these exact words were said. I'm not passing judgment. I don't know the context you're under. I don't know the pressures you're under. I don't know what's about. But when you said these words, and people laughed, I felt like this. Now, I may be perceiving the situation incorrectly, but it wasn't enjoyable for me to feel like that at work, and I don't want to feel like that. Could you please help me understand the situation so that I can perceive it in a way where I don't feel like that when you say those things again?
Yeah.
Now, in that situation, they'll probably accept going, because I've given them a way out where I've missed context or something like that. And then, they could say, in all honesty, I was having a very bad day and I shouldn't really have said those things. I apologize for saying those. It was meant as a funny joke and a quip, but I actually do really appreciate the work you're doing. And blah, blah. Like, that would end the problem there and then.
I would say 90% of the time, yes. But I would say 10% of the time when you're dealing with what I would call a true bully, they can actually use that as this is how I can further manipulate you, because you've given them that way out. But that way out is actually to downplay their actions and be like, oh, we just have fun. We make jokes at work. So you're just going to have to kind of, they'll say it in a better way.
Unacceptable. You're actually correct. And this is, in the United Kingdom now, the behaviour that you just described is actually illegal. That is now criminal behaviour because it comes under the, I forget the exact law, but it's it's controlling and manipulative behavior, which has actually been brought into law, I believe, this year. You're not allowed to do that in personal relationships. So, for example, if you're in a relationship at home, that's the equivalent of gaslighting someone's emotions and making them feel so bad that they feel trapped in a relationship. So, you're bordering on criminality there if you do it. And I would recommend anyone listening to this to not play down people's concerns. You have to address them directly. But what I would say is, if it is a true bully and they're trying to downplay the concerns and they're not empathetic and they don't kind of look, then I wouldn't react in the moment. I'd just take a breath and just say, okay, I understand your position. Thank you very much for your time. This has been a very productive conversation. And then leave and escalate. Immediately escalate. I'd go and have an informal conversation with a senior vice president or a leader and just said, I've had this conversation and I am not satisfied with how it went.
Yeah, and this is actually a good transition point too. We've dealt with the tactical. Let's say this does happen and the individual downplays it, or they act very apologetically and the behavior continues. Mm-hmm. And now we're trying to transition into, let's go chat with senior leadership. One thing I'd bring up is, I don't know how prevalent it is in the UK, but we have HR, or quite a few HR in America. Is this where you transition and go talk to your HR rep as well too, and issue like a formal complaint? Walk me through.
I would say that the choice is yours, but the progression of informality to formality accelerates very quickly once you bring in HR. It depends on the HR rep. If the HR representative is an individual who does accept informal ways of managing, then that could be a conversation. If they're not, then you just raise it, goes straight to a formal grievance.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I remember at Google you could do it anonymously, so you could literally raise a form. But there's some places where you can't do that, and then you're pulled into it. One thing I would note, across my career, 15 years working all different sites, everywhere, there was a long period of my career, folks, where I was absolutely terrified to go talk to HR. I witnessed and experienced some really not great things. And I always thought that it was like ratting someone out or, just like breaking a code of trust, some secret bond by going to HR. Like no one goes to HR. And what I've learned later stages of my career is when you are in these situations, it's okay. It is totally fine if the issue is worth it. And even if you're not sure, to reach out to that representative and at least have an informal conversation and understand, where this potential situation lands. Because the worst thing, not the worst, but it's not, what you can end up doing is if no one ever reaches out to HR and then it eventually gets bad enough and they bring in HR, the person has a clean record. And it can be like and just work out. Versus like if this was something that happened over years and you actually, went and filed these formal complaints against people who potentially are just, not great individuals, then they have the ability to then look at that as a whole. So that's just one thing that I've took away later in my career is, don't be afraid to reach out to HR in these certain situations.
I completely agree. And I would actually say that the way that I approached having a conversation with that individual is how you can approach having a conversation with HR. So you can take someone with you to make it feel more relaxing. And I would structure the conversation of these are the facts I have. This is how I felt. This is what I'd like to happen. The exact same frameworks apply for that conversation. It's just that the HR representative will be very well versed in the code of conduct, the anti-bribery and anti-corruption clauses of the employment contracts of the organization, and the cultural conversations that the senior leadership team are having. So they'll know what context to be able to put it in and go. And in that 4-box model, dependent on the behavior, for example, if someone is belittling traits that you cannot control, so race, sex, religion, whatever, That's not bullying. That is immediate discrimination, which
Right.
is illegal and gross misconduct. And then businesses have a duty of care over employees, where if they don't act in cases like that, then they can be held criminally liable. So that would go straight up to formal leadership, as we can't pass through, a nice conversation, etc. That needs to go straight to the top and have a conversation about how they want to. Now, they might want to deal with it in that, if you're going, look, so like, it's a one-off. I think it was a slip of the tongue. It might just be a word, but that absolutely needs to be caught at the top level, because, as you said, Micah, culture is the worst behavior that you permit to happen.
Yeah. Walk me through at what frameworks, or how would you look at, you've gone in, you've spoken to the senior leadership, you've gone in and talked to this project manager, you've gone in and talked to senior leadership. At what point, or what do you look for as I'm just going to leave this company? Like, this is just culturally not where I exist and thrive.
I think that's a very, very personal choice, and there's the framework here is very simply a weighing of cost benefit. Now, the 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 benefit obviously is the remuneration and the lifestyle that the work gives you, and to be honest, the enjoyment you get out of the work in that organization itself. The cost obviously is emotional. You've got the cost of switching. So if you're looking for another job, the effort you need to put in, the uncertainty there, you might have to move geographic location, etc. But another one, which is a very big cost, I'd say, is opportunity cost. The ability to perform at your best, perform in flow, learn and progress in your career is directly proportional to the learning opportunities that you have and the people that you're surrounded with and the culture they create. So if you believe, your career is going to end up at two, three, $400,000 a year wages, what is it going to cost you in opportunity costs to be around those toxic people for a prolonged period of time, given that even if you are not a toxic individual yourself, toxic behaviors have a cost to them. So that you will change how you feel in different situations, even if you feel like not speaking up, when you know that in a positive environment you really should. And for me, this really comes down to values, and it's how much credence do you place on the value of fairness and inclusivity, and, to be honest, competition and progression and these kind of things. You can have positive competition. You obviously can have negative competition. We're talking here about negative competition. But that's how I do it. And I just sit down with a piece of paper and obviously my wife or whoever you can do, and talk over the pros and cons of this kind of thing. But I'm now, Greg, personally, I'm in a fortunate situation where I've been through companies with fantastic managers, and I've had friends who go through situations like this at other companies and family members. And now I'm in charge of leading a company where even the slightest thing gives me shivers, in that you can't let this behavior progress. So I would be incredibly fast to act personally. Like, it would be in the meeting. I would stop the meeting, stand up and say, I know you didn't mean it like this, but I think that was an inappropriate comment, and I'd like everyone around this table to acknowledge if I'm telling the truth here. But I'm an exception. I think that what I've seen from other individuals, you're probably at the risk of acting too slow rather than too fast. So I'd probably say act a bit faster than you feel like you should do.
Yeah, I would completely agree. Some of these things are best nipped in the bud quickly, and finding that confidence within yourself to go act is going to be probably help the situation out far more than letting it fester. Because when you let it fester, you're only really letting it fester inside yourself. That person who made the comment and people in the room, they're not really even thinking about it, but you've just probably sat there for 2.5, 3 weeks and thought about, internalizing it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the only other thing I'd add before we jump off and give you your last comment is, I mean, there are so many great planning, excuse me, so many great planning and scheduling jobs right now that I would just, I mean, if I'm in a bad situation and I have no faith in leadership and senior leadership, dude, I'm out the door. I don't have
Mm-hmm.
time. There's no amount of money that I'm going to show up to a toxic workplace for. And I think a lot of people get wrapped up in job security and wages and other things that they haven't even gone out and tested the market to see whether they can get out of that situation and land on their feet. And so that is a low cost, very easy thing to go do, is just go test the market and find out if you're in a bad situation. Maybe you can just leave and go find a better one. Greg, outside of that weird frog in my throat, because it is cold season at this point in time, any final thoughts that you have before we wrap up this episode?
Yeah, I think here, just to make people feel good and better about this situation, what I'd say is it is absolutely fine for you to feel however you feel. Feeling is a natural human thing. You cannot control how you feel. It is not fine to impose actions on others. That is a big difference, the choice. And I would have an absolute zero tolerance policy for any kind of bullying and harassment. And the way I think about it is, imagine if your child was here. Imagine if that person was talking to your child, or your parent or whatever. How would you feel about that situation? Because people have the ability to act more courageously for others than they do for themselves. So that's how I'd encourage you to gauge a situation. And then just, if you find yourself in the situation, re-listen to this podcast, write down the 4-box framework, write down the conversation framework, and then just go and start having those conversations. It is never worth being in a toxic relationship, whether or not it's in the workplace or outside of the workplace. And to be honest, we don't have to tolerate that. What I'd say is, it is fine to feel however you feel, and feel confident that your actions are for the greater good.
Wonderful. Amazing place to leave it. Well, folks, that's all for this week. We hope you have an amazing week. And if you are a listener on Spotify or YouTube or Amazon, wherever you're listening, please hit the subscribe button and share this podcast. It allows us to keep doing what we do. Beyond Deadlines also offers a load of free content. So go check out our newsletter. There's a link in the show notes. You get a free email every single week with scheduling and planning jobs, tips and tricks and tactics, and a whole load of other stuff. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.